The rain hammered against Jack Miller's shoulders like mortar fire. Each drop a stinging memory he couldn't outrun. He stood frozen before the weathered sign, Hope Haven Animal Shelter, his fingers tracing the outline of the pill bottle in his pocket. 45 years old, and he couldn't remember the last time his hands hadn't trembled. Another crack of thunder sent him back to Kandahar, to screams and smoke and decisions no man should make. The VA counselor's words echoed, "Just go see Jack. What's the worst that could happen?" He almost laughed at that. Jack knew exactly what the worst looked like. Through the streaked windows he saw movement, dogs pacing, jumping, begging for attention, all except one. In the furthest kennel, half hidden in shadow, a German shepherd lay motionless, its amber eyes fixed on nothing. 3 legs instead of 4. Jack recognized the emptiness, the 1,000-yard stare of a soldier who'd seen too much and come back less than whole. The dog didn't bark or whine like the others. It just watched, as if it had long ago accepted that no one was coming. When Jack finally pushed open the door, the shelter worker barely looked up from her clipboard. "Closing in 20 minutes, she announced, her voice flat with end-of-day exhaustion. But as Jack moved past the yapping, eager dogs toward that back kennel, something changed. The German shepherd's ears pricked forward. It struggled to its 3 feet, head tilted as if seeing something the humans couldn't. Their eyes met across the concrete divide, brown against blue, and in that moment, 2 broken souls recognized each other. The dog let out a single soft whine that cut through Jack's chest like shrapnel. The shelter worker froze, clipboard forgotten. "He's never done that before," she whispered. "Not for anyone. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments, along with the city you're watching from." Now let's continue with the story. Jack Miller hadn't always been a ghost. Before Afghanistan, he'd commanded respect as a Special Forces team leader, the man who made the impossible calls and brought his people home. But that was before the rescue mission in Kandahar went sideways. Before he'd watched half his team die in an ambush that intelligence had missed. Before he'd had to choose which of his wounded men to carry out first, knowing the others might not make it. The Army had given him medals for exceptional leadership under fire, but Jack knew the truth. He'd failed them. 3 body bags and his own shattered psyche were the real souvenirs he'd brought home. Sarah had been his anchor during those first nightmarish months. His wife of 15 years had weathered the mood swings, the night terrors, the days when he couldn't leave the bedroom. "We'll get through this together," she'd promised, and for a while, he'd believed her. Then came the diagnosis, stage 4 pancreatic cancer, and 6 brutal months later, Jack buried the only person who still saw him as whole. The cabin at the edge of Pinewood, Montana became his fortress against the world. Most days he spoke to no one. Most nights, he relived the explosion, the screams, the choices. The bottle of pills grew increasingly tempting with each passing season. The German shepherd known as Rex had his own war stories. Military records listed him as K9772, a top-tier explosives detection specialist with 3 tours in Afghanistan. His handler, Staff Sergeant Mike Coleman, had praised him as the best damn soldier on 4 legs. Then came the school collapse outside Kabul, a building rigged to detonate after first responders arrived. Rex had detected the secondary devices, leading evacuations that saved 17 children. But when part of the structure gave way, Rex was trapped beneath the rubble. The rescue team amputated his rear leg in the field just to extract him. After months of rehabilitation, the military deemed him unsuitable for continued service. Too old, too damaged to retrain. The shelter had been his home for 11 months. No one wanted a 3-legged war dog with anxiety issues and a tendency to wake howling from nightmares. Pinewood had once been just another struggling rural town, but recent development interest had divided the community. Richard Blake, a developer from Missoula, had proposed luxury vacation homes along the river, just where the underfunded animal shelter currently stood. Town council meetings had grown heated, with economic growth advocates squaring off against those who valued the town's modest, close-knit character. Among the latter was Margaret Wilson, a VA counselor who'd served as a combat nurse. She'd been pushing Jack for months to try animal therapy, even as the shelter's future hung in the balance. Sometimes, she'd told him, The things we think are broken might just need the right person to see their value. Jack, I'm not asking as your counselor anymore. Margaret's voice had carried a rare edge during their last session. She'd pushed a pamphlet across her desk, Hope Haven Animal Shelter, printed in fading blue letters above a photo of a smiling family with a golden retriever. I'm asking, as someone who's watched you disappear for 2 years. One visit. That's all. Jack had taken the pamphlet only to end the conversation, tucking it into his jacket with no intention of ever looking at it again. But that morning, after another night of waking up screaming, he'd found himself staring at the shelter's address. What could it hurt? It wasn't like he had anywhere else to be. The shelter smelled of disinfectant and wet fur when Jack finally stepped inside, shaking rain from his jacket. A young woman with a nose ring glanced up from the reception desk, her initial smile fading slightly as she assessed him. Unshaven, hollow-eyed, clearly uncomfortable. "Can I help you?" she asked cautiously. Jack cleared his throat, suddenly feeling ridiculous. What was he doing here? "Just looking," he managed. She nodded, relief evident. "Well, adoption hours end at 5. Feel free to walk around. The dogs are in the kennels through that door." She pointed, then added with practiced brightness, "All our animals are spayed or neutered and up to date on vaccinations." Jack moved through the door into a cacophony of barking. Dogs of every size and color jumped against chain-link gates, tails wagging frantically. A chocolate lab pushed his nose through the fence, whining for attention. A terrier mix spun in excited circles. Jack moved past them all, oddly detached, like he was watching himself from above. This had been a mistake. What had Margaret been thinking? He couldn't even take care of himself, let alone another living thing. He was almost to the exit when he reached the last kennel, the one containing the 3-legged German Shepherd. Unlike the others, this dog didn't approach. He remained in his corner, amber eyes watchful, suspicious. Only his ears moved, tracking Jack's presence. "That's Rex," the shelter worker said, appearing beside Jack. "Not really adoption material, I'm afraid. Too old, too many issues." She leaned against the wall, clipboard hugged against her chest. "Military working dog. Lost his leg in Afghanistan. His previous handler didn't make it back, and Rex never really adjusted afterward." Something shifted in Jack's chest. A recognition. A mirror. "Can I?" His voice sounded strange even to his own ears. "Can I see him?" The worker looked surprised. "Sure, but he doesn't usually respond well to strangers. Doesn't like men much at all, actually." She opened the kennel door cautiously, attaching a lead to Rex's collar before he could retreat further. The dog stood rigidly, neither aggressive nor friendly. Up close, Jack could see the gray around his muzzle, the scars beneath his fur. "Army?" the worker asked, noticing Jack's posture. He nodded once. "Special Forces." She handed him the leash, her expression softening. "Maybe he'll sense that. They say dogs know." Jack accepted the thin strap of nylon, half expecting the animal to pull away or growl. Instead, Rex simply stood, watching him with those knowing eyes. No judgment, no pity, no awkward questions about medals or missions, just quiet assessment. They walked to a small enclosed yard behind the shelter, rain still falling lightly around them. Rex limped slightly but moved with purpose. Jack didn't speak. What was there to say to a dog? But occasionally he'd give a small hand signal, old habits from working with military K9 units. To his surprise, Rex responded, shifting position, stopping, turning. "He remembered S," Jack murmured. The dog's ears twitched at the sound of his voice. For the first time in months, Jack felt something other than numbness or grief. Not happiness, exactly, but recognition. "I want to take him," Jack told the worker when they returned inside. She blinked, clearly caught off guard. "Mr. Miller. Jack Miller." "Mr. Miller, I don't think you understand. Rex has severe anxiety, traumatic stress responses, trust issues. He needs someone with extensive experience handling service dogs." Jack held her gaze steadily. "Ma'am, I have extensive experience with traumatic stress." Something in his expression must have convinced her, because after a moment she sighed. "There's paperwork, and a home check, and he has medical needs. The amputation site needs regular care." The drive to Jack's cabin was silent except for the rhythmic swish of windshield wipers. Rex sat in the passenger seat, neither relaxed nor panicked, simply present. Jack found himself speaking, his voice rough from disuse. "It's not much," he said as they turned onto the gravel road leading to his property. Quiet, though. No neighbors for half a mile. Rex's ears moved, but he remained still, watching the trees pass outside the window. The rain had stopped, leaving everything smelling of pine and wet earth. Jack wondered if he'd made a terrible mistake. What did he know about caring for a traumatized animal? He could barely feed himself most days. The cabin appeared through the trees. Small, weathered, but solid. Jack parked and opened the passenger door. "This is it," he said, unsure if he was speaking to the dog or himself. Rex descended awkwardly, immediately scanning the surroundings, a soldier's habit, checking sightlines, potential threats. Jack recognized the behavior because he did the same thing every time he came home. He unlocked the door and stood aside. After a long moment of hesitation, Rex limped inside, nose working, ears alert. Jack followed, watching as the dog made a careful circuit of the main room, kitchen, bedroom. The inspection complete, Rex returned to the living room and settled himself in the corner with the clearest view of both the door and windows. "Smart," Jack commented. A knock at the door startled them both. Rex's hackles rose as Jack opened it to find Tom Wilson, his nearest neighbor, standing on the porch with a scowl etched across his weathered face. "Since when do you have a dog, Miller?" Tom demanded, peering past Jack to where Rex had risen, body tense. Jack stepped slightly to block his view. "Since today." Tom's frown deepened. "That one of those attack dogs? Looks military." His tone made it clear this wasn't a compliment. "My son's got kids, you know, they play in those woods." Jack felt a familiar tightness in his chest, the beginning of the anger that always simmered beneath the surface. "He's a retired service dog, and he's staying." Tom's mouth opened, likely to argue further, but Jack closed the door. He had enough battles to fight without adding neighborhood disputes. That first night set their pattern. Jack took the couch, leaving the bedroom door open. Around 2 a.m. he woke shouting, sheets tangled around him, the explosion still flashing behind his eyelids. When his vision cleared, Rex was there, standing beside the bed, not touching him, but present. Watchful. Jack's breathing gradually slowed. "Sorry," he muttered, embarrassed despite himself. Rex blinked, then settled on the floor beside the bed. By morning, they'd both managed a few hours of uneasy sleep, the most Jack had gotten in weeks. The first walks were tentative. Jack would clip the worn leather leash to Rex's collar, and they'd venture down the narrow path behind the cabin, rarely going further than the small stream that cut through the property. Rex moved with the careful precision of someone who knew what it meant to relearn balance, to find new ways of navigating familiar terrain. Jack found himself matching his pace to the dog's, not out of impatience, but respect. There was dignity in Rex's determination, in the way he never whined when his remaining back leg tired, or when rough ground challenged his stability. By the second week, their excursions stretched longer. Jack noticed himself breathing more deeply among the pines, sometimes pausing to observe things he'd previously hurried past. The industrious work of ants building their colony, the intricate patterns in tree bark, the changing quality of light as it filtered through branches. "Forward," Jack said one morning, the command feeling strange on his tongue after so many months of near silence. Rex's ears perked immediately, his posture shifting in response. It was an old military directional cue, one Jack hadn't consciously remembered using. Rex moved ahead precisely the regulation distance a canine would position from his handler. Jack tried another. Hold. Rex froze, alert but motionless. Something warmed in Jack's chest. Not quite pride, but close to it. That evening, he dug through boxes he hadn't opened since moving to the cabin, finding an old manual on military working dog commands. He stayed up reading until dawn, occasionally looking over at Rex, who slept curled near the wood stove, twitching occasionally with dreams of his own. The fourth week brought the first breakthrough. Jack had been sleeping fitfully, the familiar nightmare building. Dust and blood and radio static crackling with desperate calls for medevac. He woke with a strangled shout, heart hammering against his ribs, sweat soaking through his t-shirt. But this time, before the panic could fully descend, something warm pressed against his side. Rex had climbed onto the bed, not demanding attention, simply offering his solid presence. Jack's hand found the dog's fur, fingers trembling. Rex didn't pull away. They stayed like that until morning, neither fully asleep nor fully awake, but somehow bridging the darkness together. The next day, Jack drove into town for lumber. By sunset, he'd constructed a sturdy ramp alongside the 3 porch steps, making it easier for Rex to enter and exit the cabin. If Margaret noticed the improvement in Jack's demeanor during their next session, she was wise enough not to comment directly. But she smiled when he mentioned Rex by name for the first time. The trouble began innocuously enough. Tom Wilson's complaint to the county sheriff about a dangerous military attack dog went nowhere officially, but it traveled through Pinewood's gossip channels with remarkable efficiency. Within days, Jack noticed the stares when he took Rex to the general store, the way mothers pulled children closer when they passed on the street. "Just ignore them," Margaret advised during one of their sessions. "People fear what they don't understand." Easier said than done. Jack had spent 2 years avoiding human contact. Now he found himself reluctantly at the center of unwanted attention. Still, there was something about having Rex beside him that made it bearable. A shared burden somehow weighed less. The town council meeting was scheduled for the first Tuesday in April. Jack wouldn't have known about it if Margaret hadn't called. "They're discussing new restrictions on dangerous breeds," she explained, her frustration evident even through the phone. "Tom Wilson's rallying support. I think he's working with that developer, Blake, trying to create issues that would impact the shelter." Jack's initial instinct was to retreat, to pull the blinds and forget the outside world existed. But that night, watching Rex sleeping peacefully for perhaps the first time since they'd met, something hardened in his resolve. They'd both survived wars. Surely they could face a town meeting. The community center was packed when Jack arrived, Rex at his side. Heads turned, conversations paused. He took a seat in the back, grateful when Margaret appeared beside him, offering a reassuring nod. Richard Blake sat near the front, his expensive suit out of place among the flannel and denim of most Pinewood residents. Tom Wilson occupied the chair beside him, shooting occasional glances toward Jack. The proposed ordinance was worse than Margaret had described, requiring special licensing, insurance, and containment for breeds deemed potentially dangerous, with German Shepherds prominently listed. The requirements would make keeping Rex financially impossible for Jack's limited veterans benefits. When public comments opened, Tom stood first, describing his genuine concern for community safety and the unpredictable nature of military dogs trained to attack. Jack hadn't planned to speak. Public attention was among his personal hells. But before he fully registered his decision, he was on his feet. "My name is Jack Miller," he began, his voice rougher than he'd intended. "I served 3 tours in Afghanistan with special forces." The room grew quieter. "The dog beside me is Rex. He served too. Lost his leg saving children from a bombing." Jack paused, fighting the tightness in his throat. "He's not a weapon. He's a veteran." To his surprise, Rex settled against his leg, a warm pressure grounding him as he continued. "Maybe instead of fearing what we've been through, you might consider what we still have to offer." When he finished, the silence held a different quality. Margaret was the first to applaud, followed gradually by others. The council tabled the ordinance for further study. Blake's expression remained impassive, but his eyes tracked Jack and Rex as they left. The confrontation at the town meeting changed something in their daily routine. Jack began taking Rex to the hardware store where old Joe Emerson, a Vietnam veteran, offered him part-time work stocking shelves. "Don't mind having another vet around," Joe said gruffly. "Dogs welcome too." Rex adapted quickly, learning to navigate the narrow aisles without disturbing merchandise. Customers gradually moved from apprehension to curiosity to acceptance. Some even brought treats specifically for Rex, who accepted them with dignified restraint. Jack found himself answering questions, explaining about canine units, sometimes even sharing sanitized stories from his deployments. Words came easier with Rex beside him, as if the dog's presence somehow buffered the intensity of human interaction. It was during these improving weeks that Jack made the discovery. Rex had developed a hot spot on his shoulder, a patch of irritated skin that required cleaning. Jack had filled the bathtub with a few inches of warm water, speaking in the low, steady voice he'd learned Rex responded to best. "Easy now, just going to get this cleaned up." As he worked the medicated shampoo through Rex's fur, his fingers encountered something metallic beneath the thick ruff around the dog's neck. Gently parting the hair, Jack found a set of military identification tags on a broken chain, embedded so deeply they'd nearly been absorbed by the skin. Rex remained still as Jack carefully worked them free, only whining softly when the raw skin was exposed. Later, after bandaging the area, Jack examined the tarnished metal discs under the kitchen light. The information stamped into them hit him like physical blow. Coleman, Michael J., followed by a service number, blood type, and unit designation. Jack sank into a chair, the tags cold against his palm. Staff Sergeant Michael Coleman. Mike. The memories crashed through the carefully constructed walls in Jack's mind. Mike's easy laugh during their shared deployments, his steady hands during firefights, the letter Jack had written to Mike's parents explaining how their son had died saving 3 wounded civilians. And always at Mike's side, a German shepherd with focused eyes and unfailing courage. What had Mike called him? Reggie, in casual moments, but officially registered as Rex. The same Rex who now watched Jack from across the kitchen, head tilted in that attentive way that suggested he sensed the emotional storm brewing. "You were his," Jack whispered. Rex's ears pricked forward at the shift in his tone. With trembling hands, Jack reached for his phone, dialing Margaret's number. "I need to see Rex's complete file from the military," he said when she answered. "There's something." He struggled to find words for the tangle of emotions in his chest. "I think I knew him. Before." Margaret's silence suggested she understood the magnitude of what he was asking. Records of military working dogs weren't easily accessible, especially their deployment histories. "I'll see what I can do," she finally replied. After hanging up, Jack knelt beside Rex, holding out the tags so the dog could scent them. "Was it you? With Mike in Kandahar?" Rex didn't answer. Couldn't answer, but he pressed his muzzle against Jack's hand in a gesture that felt like acknowledgement. That night, Jack dreamed not of explosions, but of a dusty forward operating base, of Mike Coleman showing off his K9 partner's detection skills, of a younger Rex racing across training grounds with joyful precision. He woke with tears on his face for the first time since Sarah's funeral. Rex lay beside the bed, watching him with those knowing eyes. "He'd be glad it was you," Jack told him, reaching down to touch the graying muzzle. "That we found each other." The universe, it seemed, had a strange sense of symmetry. Returning to Jack, a living connection to the friend he couldn't save, and to Rex, a link to the handler he had lost. The recognition created a new dimension to their bond, one built not just on shared brokenness, but on a shared past neither had fully remembered until now. The first frost of autumn painted the ground white as Jack hammered the final board into place. He stepped back to survey his work, a modest obstacle course built from lumber, old tires, and repurposed drainage pipes. Nothing fancy, nothing that would strain Rex's 3-legged capabilities, but challenging enough to engage his training. Jack had spent evenings sketching the layout, modifying standard K9 courses to accommodate Rex's disability. "What do you think?" he asked, turning to where Rex sat watching with alert interest. The German shepherd's tail swept once across the ground, neither excitement nor dismissal, just acknowledgement. Jack smiled slightly. "Let's try it out." The first run was clumsy. Rex hesitated at the low tunnel, backed away from the narrow walkway. Jack didn't push, didn't raise his voice. Instead, he demonstrated, crawling through the tunnel himself, feeling ridiculous but determined. Rex watched, head tilted in that curious way that suggested he was processing, evaluating. When Jack tried again, guiding Rex with the commands he'd researched, the dog followed tentatively. By the third attempt, something shifted. Rex's posture changed, muscle memory awakening as training overrode hesitation. "Good boy," Jack murmured when Rex navigated the entire course. The praise felt inadequate for the determination he'd witnessed. Daily training became their ritual. Jack gradually reintroduced the full vocabulary of K9 commands, search patterns, alert positions, even some of the advanced detection sequences. Rex responded with increasing enthusiasm, as if grateful to have purpose restored to his days. The physical changes became evident, muscles rebuilding, coat regaining shine, even the permanent limp becoming less pronounced as Rex learned to distribute his weight more efficiently. Jack found himself changing too. The nightmares didn't disappear, but they came less frequently. Sometimes he'd catch himself smiling at Rex's small victories, feeling something dangerously close to pride. Word spread around Pinewood. Veterans from neighboring communities began appearing at the hardware store where Jack worked, ostensibly to purchase supplies, but really to meet the three-legged war dog who was becoming something of a local legend. Many brought stories of their own service dogs, therapy animals, or just the pets that had helped them transition back to civilian life. Jack found himself in conversations he would have avoided months earlier, exchanging experiences, sometimes even phone numbers. The informal gathering gradually evolved into what Margaret jokingly called Vets and Pets, a weekly meetup behind the store where service members and their animals could find understanding without explanation. The true test came unexpectedly. Jack had been splitting firewood one evening when a truck he didn't recognize pulled onto his property, engine cutting before headlights swept the cabin. Rex, who had been lying nearby watching Jack work, was on his feet instantly, not barking, but alert, body tense. Jack set down the axe, suddenly aware of how isolated the cabin was, how long it would take for help to arrive if needed. The truck door opened, and Rex moved forward, positioning himself between Jack and the potential threat. The low growl in his throat held the controlled warning of a trained guardian. "Who's there?" Jack called, reaching down to rest a steadying hand on Rex's shoulder. "Just me," came the response, and Joe Emerson's familiar figure emerged from the shadows. "Didn't mean to startle you. Thought I'd drop off that special order that came in." He held up a package, then froze, clearly registering Rex's protective stance. Jack gave the stand-down command, feeling a complicated pride in how quickly Rex had assessed and responded to the perceived threat. Later, after Joe had left, Jack knelt beside Rex. "Good job, soldier," he said quietly, and for the first time Rex licked his hand, a small gesture that felt monumental in its significance. The shelter controversy erupted again with unexpected force. Richard Blake had revised his development proposal, increasing the financial incentives to the town while adding what he called community benefits, including a small symbolic donation to relocate the animal shelter to an inferior location on the outskirts of town. The proposal gained traction among Pinewood's business owners, who saw potential for increased tourism and property values. The battle lines were drawn at town meetings: economic growth versus community character, financial pragmatism versus moral obligation. Jack might have stayed out of it entirely if not for Margaret's late-night call. "They're using you as an example," she said, anger evident in her usually calm voice. "Tom Wilson is telling people that dangerous dogs from the shelter are threatening neighborhood safety. He specifically mentioned that three-legged military dog at the council meeting." Jack's hand tightened on the phone. "Blake's got half the town convinced that the shelter is housing unadoptable animals that should be—" She stopped herself, but Jack could fill in the blank. Euthanized, disposed of, forgotten. The next council meeting found Jack seated in the front row, Rex beside him, both impeccably composed. When the public comment period opened, he was the first to stand. This time, his voice didn't waver. "My name is Jack Miller. I've been a resident of Pinewood for 2 years. He gestured to Rex. "This is my partner, Rex, former military working dog, explosives detection specialist with 3 combat deployments." Murmurs rippled through the audience. "I'm here because I understand some of you have concerns about the shelter and the animals it rescues, particularly ones like Rex." He paused, meeting Tom Wilson's gaze directly. "Before you make decisions based on fear, I'd like to show you something." To the council's visible surprise, Jack proceeded to demonstrate Rex's training, the precise response to commands, the controlled alerts, the disciplined demeanor that defied stereotypes of dangerous animals. He concluded by inviting the council members to meet Rex individually. "He's not a threat to this community," Jack stated firmly. "Neither are the other animals at that shelter waiting for a second chance. They're an asset with value that can't be measured in property tax revenue." Several veterans in the audience stood in silent support. Margaret watched from the back, a small smile playing at her lips. Richard Blake was less impressed. He cornered Jack in the parking lot afterward, Tom Wilson hovering nearby. "Quite a show, Mr. Miller," Blake said, his smile not reaching his eyes. But sentiment doesn't pay bills. This town needs economic revitalization, not a collection of strays and their damaged caretakers. The deliberate choice of words, damaged, hit its mark. Jack felt the familiar anger rising, dangerous in its intensity. Rex pressed against his leg, a grounding presence. "This isn't over," Jack replied quietly. "Not by a long shot." Blake's smile widened. "Actually, I think it is. The final vote is next month, and I have the commitments I need. I was hoping to reach an amicable arrangement, but—" He shrugged eloquently. "Progress waits for no one, Mr. Miller. Not even heroes." The confrontation left Jack shaken, not by Blake's confidence, but by his own reaction to it. The surge of rage that had momentarily blinded him, the darkness he'd worked so hard to contain. At home, he sat on the porch steps, breathing deeply as his therapist had taught him, while Rex kept silent vigil beside him. The proposed development wasn't wrong in principle. Pinewood did need economic support. But there had to be a way forward that didn't sacrifice the vulnerable in the name of progress. The irony wasn't lost on Jack that he was now fighting for a cause, when months ago he'd barely been able to fight for himself. The chest pains began on a Tuesday morning. Jack was midway through stocking a shelf at the hardware store when the pressure descended, a vice tightening around his sternum, sending cold sweat across his forehead. He gripped the shelf, willing the sensation to pass. Rex noticed immediately, pressing against Jack's legs, whining softly. "I'm okay, boy," Jack muttered, but the dog's agitation only increased. Joe found them like that, Rex practically herding Jack toward the door. "You look like hell, Miller," Joe observed bluntly. "Rex thinks so too. Go home, see a doctor." Jack tried to object, but another wave of pain silenced his protest. The clinic's diagnosis was both better and worse than expected. Not a heart attack, but warning signs of significant cardiac stress. The doctor, a practical woman in her 50s, didn't sugarcoat her assessment. "Your body's been in fight or flight for years, Mr. Miller. The physical demands of combat, then the emotional toll of PTSD. Your heart's paying the price." She prescribed medication, recommended stress reduction techniques, and reluctantly allowed Rex to remain during the examination when it became clear the dog's absence increased Jack's anxiety. "That's quite a bond," she observed, watching Rex's careful attention to Jack. "He's more than a pet to you." Jack nodded, absently stroking Rex's ear. "He saved me," he said simply. The admission surprised him, not its truth but his willingness to speak it aloud. The doctor smiled. "Then let him keep doing that by taking care of yourself. Veterans your age with untreated PTSD have significantly higher rates of heart disease. Make an appointment with a cardiologist, and consider this prescription as non-negotiable as a military order." Financial reality hit hard after the medical bills arrived. Jack's VA benefits covered some expenses, but the specialized cardiac care, medications, and follow-up appointments created a mounting burden. Simultaneously, Rex developed an infection in his amputation site, requiring antibiotics and special care. Sitting at his kitchen table surrounded by bills, Jack faced bitter choices. Cutting his own medications wasn't an option. The doctor had been clear about the risks, but Rex's treatments weren't technically essential. The thought of denying Rex proper care knotted in Jack's stomach like a physical wound. The solution came from an unexpected source. Joe Emerson approached Jack during a quiet afternoon at the store. "Need more hours?" he asked without preamble. Before Jack could respond, Joe continued. "Got a proposition. Store could use a mascot. Customers like that dog of yours. Brings in veterans, families with kids. Good for business." He outlined a modest plan, increasing Jack's hours while officially designating Rex as the store's security consultant, complete with a small stipend for his services that would conveniently cover his medical expenses. "Don't need an answer now," Joe said, turning back to his inventory sheets. "Just think about it." Jack recognized the offer for what it was. Not charity, but respect, wrapped in practical business language to preserve his dignity. Rex's transition to official store mascot was seamless. Joe provided an old cushion that became Rex's designated spot near the register. Children asked to pet him, which Rex tolerated with stoic patience. Veterans sought him out specifically, some traveling considerable distances after hearing about the three-legged military dog who greeted customers with quiet dignity. Jack created a small sign explaining Rex's service background and his missing leg, partly to satisfy curiosity, but also to educate. "He's teaching them," Margaret observed during one of her visits to the store, "about resilience, about value that remains after loss." Jack had never considered it that way, but watching a young boy with a prosthetic arm earnestly telling Rex they were the same, he understood what she meant. Remarkably, the community's perception began to shift. People who had once crossed the street to avoid Rex now greeted him by name. Tom Wilson remained hostile, but his complaints found less sympathetic audiences. Even some of Blake's strongest supporters seemed less certain about the shelter's planned destruction. "You're changing minds," Margaret told Jack. "Both of you are." Jack wasn't sure that was enough. Blake's financial leverage remained powerful, the final council vote approaching rapidly, but something had awakened in him that he'd thought long dead. Hope, stubborn and unexpected, like the first green shoot after forest fire. Whatever came next, Jack and Rex would face it together, two veterans who had found in each other something worth fighting for. 1 year. Jack realized it as he sipped his morning coffee, watching Rex bask in a patch of early sunlight on the porch. Exactly 1 year since that rainy day at the shelter when they'd found each other. The recognition stirred something in him. Not quite celebration, but acknowledgement. They'd survived a year together, these two broken soldiers. More than survived. They'd rebuilt something neither had thought possible. "What do you say to a hike?" Jack asked. Rex's ears perked up, his tail sweeping the wooden planks in measured approval. They hadn't ventured deep into the forest in months, not since the cardiac episode had forced Jack to limit exertion. But today felt different. Important somehow. The doctor had cleared him for moderate activity last week, and the weather was perfect, clear skies with the crisp edge of impending autumn. "Let's go somewhere special." They took the northern trail, climbing steadily through pine and aspen. Jack had packed carefully: water, first aid supplies, Rex's medications, his own heart pills, even the emergency satellite phone Margaret had insisted he carry after learning about his condition. The weight of the backpack was familiar, comforting in its preparedness. Rex moved with the fluid adaptation he'd perfected, his three-legged gait remarkably efficient on the uneven terrain. Occasionally he would range ahead, then circle back to check on Jack, behavior ingrained from his military training. Never leave your partner behind. They reached the ridge by midday, settling on an outcropping that overlooked the valley. Pinewood lay below, toy-sized in the distance, surrounded by the vast wilderness that had drawn Jack here after Sarah's death. "Not bad for a couple of war relics," Jack remarked, offering Rex a drink from his cupped palm. The German shepherd drank with dignified restraint, then settled beside Jack, their shoulders touching. For a while, they simply existed together in the quiet, listening to wind through leaves and distant bird calls. Jack found himself talking, not consciously at first, just words spilling out into the mountain air. He talked about Sarah, about Afghanistan, about the emptiness after coming home, things he'd never voiced to his therapist, to Margaret, to anyone. Rex listened, his amber eyes occasionally meeting Jack's, offering neither judgment nor false comfort, just steadfast presence. The storm approached with mountain suddenness. One moment clear skies, the next a dark mass of clouds rolling over the ridge. Jack checked his watch, calculating the hike back. "Time to move, partner." They'd made it halfway down when the rain began, fat, cold drops that quickly became a deluge. The trail transformed beneath their feet, dirt becoming slick mud. Jack slowed his pace, aware of the treacherous footing. Rex stayed closer now, seeming to sense the changing danger. A flash of lightning illuminated the forest, followed by a crack of thunder that echoed through the canyon. Rex flinched but held position. "Easy," Jack murmured, as much to himself as to Rex. The trail narrowed as it curved around a rock outcropping. Jack skirted the edge, one hand steadying himself against stone. The next moments unfolded with nightmare clarity. The section of trail beneath his feet giving way, the sudden absence of solid ground, his body pitching forward into empty space. He heard Rex bark once, sharp and alarmed, before impact drove the air from his lungs, a bone-jarring collision with the slope below. Then movement, uncontrolled and gathering speed, his body tumbling down the mountain through brush and stone. A final impact, more severe than the others, stopped his descent. Pain bloomed white-hot in his leg, his ribs. Above, barely visible through the rain, Rex stood at the edge where the trail had collapsed, barking frantically. Jack tried to stand, cried out as weight bore down on his right leg. The angle was wrong, sickeningly wrong. Broken then. He catalogued injuries with detached precision: definite leg fracture, possible rib fractures, numerous lacerations. The rain continued mercilessly, plastering his clothes to his skin, washing blood from cuts in pale ribbons. His backpack had remained with him through the fall, but reaching it sent fresh waves of pain through his torso. The satellite phone, when he finally extracted it, showed a cracked screen. Dead. Perfect. Jack looked up at Rex, still standing sentinel on the trail above. "Quite a mess I've gotten us into," he called, his voice strained. The slope between them was steep but navigable for a four-legged animal. For Rex, with his missing limb, it presented a nearly impossible challenge. "Stay there!" Jack shouted above the rain. "Stay on the trail." But Rex had already begun his descent, picking his way down with agonizing slowness, testing each step before committing his weight. Several times he slipped, recovering with desperate scrambling that sent showers of loose stone toward Jack. When Rex finally reached him, the dog was trembling with exertion. His breathing labored. He pressed his muzzle against Jack's neck, a brief moment of relief before his training reasserted itself. Rex began inspecting Jack methodically, scenting the blood, the sweat, the pain. "Good boy," Jack whispered, running a hand over Rex's soaked fur. "But we've got a problem." The reality of their situation settled coldly in his stomach. They were at least 4 miles from the cabin in worsening weather, with no communication. Jack couldn't walk, and night would arrive in a few hours, bringing dangerous temperature drops. Rex whined softly, sensing Jack's concern. Through rain-blurred vision, Jack studied their surroundings. They'd landed on a small shelf of relatively flat ground, bordered by steeper drops on 3 sides. Going down further wasn't an option. Going back up to the trail looked equally impossible, at least in his condition. Jack made his decision. Fumbling in his pack, he extracted an emergency whistle and his pocket knife. With painful movements, he cut a section of cord from the backpack, tying it to Rex's collar. "Listen carefully," he said, holding Rex's face between his hands. The dog stilled, attention absolute. "You need to go for help. Go home. Home, Rex." He repeated the command, attaching the whistle to the cord. People might not understand what Rex was trying to communicate, but they would notice a dog with a whistle, would hopefully investigate. "Go," Jack said firmly, pointing in the direction of the cabin. "Get help." Rex didn't move. His eyes remained fixed on Jack, body rigid with resistant loyalty. Jack's voice hardened into the commanding tone he'd rarely used with Rex. "Go, now, find help." Still, Rex hesitated. Jack felt desperation rising. The storm was worsening, the temperature dropping. If Rex stayed, they might both die on this mountainside. Jack gathered his remaining strength, forcing steel into his voice. "Rex, mission, go." The military command terminology finally penetrated. Rex's ears flattened, his posture shifting from companion to soldier. He looked at Jack one last time, a gaze so human in its reluctance that Jack had to look away. Then Rex turned, beginning the difficult climb back to the trail. Jack watched until Rex disappeared over the ridge, swallowed by rain and gathering darkness. "Come back with an army, buddy," he murmured, then set about the grim business of survival. He constructed a rudimentary shelter using the backpack and broken branches, trying to create some barrier against the relentless rain. The pain in his leg had settled into a persistent throb, occasionally spiking when he moved incautiously. Worse was the creeping cold, the first warnings of hypothermia that he recognized from survival training. He needed to stay awake, stay alert. He began to talk aloud, a running monologue to combat the silence, the pain, the growing fear that Rex might not make it back to civilization. Rex moved with single-minded determination. The familiar trail had become alien territory, landmarks obscured by rain, scents washed away, visibility reduced to mere yards. His injured leg protested with each step, old scar tissue and compromised muscles pushed beyond endurance. Twice he fell, scrambling back to his feet through sheer will. The forest grew darker as evening approached, shadows deepening between trees. Rex navigated by instinct now, an internal compass oriented toward home, toward help for his handler. The whistle at his collar bounced against his chest, a constant reminder of his mission. The descent into the valley required painful choices. The main trail, winding and switch-backed, would take too long. Rex diverted to steeper game paths, sacrificing safety for speed. His breathing grew labored, his remaining back leg trembling with fatigue. Still, he drove onward, stopping only when absolutely necessary to catch his breath or reorient. Night had fully descended when he reached familiar territory, the stream that marked the border of Jack's property. Rex paused briefly at the water's edge, drinking deeply before pushing on toward lights visible through the trees. Tom Wilson was locking his workshop when he heard it. A strange, inconsistent whistling sound carried on the wind. He peered into the darkness, hand still on the padlock. There it was again, accompanied by the sound of something moving through underbrush. Tom reached for the flashlight he kept by the door, sweeping its beam across his yard. The light caught reflective eyes, then revealed a mud-covered, exhausted German shepherd standing at the edge of his property. "What the hell?" Tom muttered, recognizing Jack Miller's dog despite its bedraggled state. The animal was alone, a whistle attached to its collar, and clearly in distress. "Go on, get out of here," Tom called, waving his hand dismissively. Rex didn't retreat. Instead, he stepped forward, barking once, a clear, purposeful sound unlike the aggression Tom had expected. The dog turned, moved a few paces toward the forest, then looked back, barking again. The behavior triggered distant memory, a movie Tom had seen years ago, some collie trying to lead people to a fallen child. "You've got to be kidding me," he said, but an uneasy feeling had taken root. Miller was a loner, but he wasn't the type to let his dog wander loose, especially in this weather. And that whistle. Tom sighed heavily, returning to his workshop for a raincoat and better flashlight. "This better not be some trick," he told Rex, who was already moving toward the forest, looking back to ensure Tom followed. The search was maddening. Rex led confidently at first, following whatever scent or instinct guided him. But as they climbed higher into the mountains, the dog began to hesitate, doubling back, seemingly confused by the maze of small game trails. The rain had thankfully slowed to a drizzle, but darkness made progress treacherous. Tom checked his watch, nearly 2 hours since they'd set out. "This is insane," he muttered. "We need proper search and rescue, not an old man and a crippled dog." But something kept him moving forward. The absolute conviction in Rex's behavior, the growing certainty that Jack Miller was in serious trouble. Tom's phone showed no service, as expected in these mountains. He was considering turning back to call for professional help when Rex suddenly stiffened, head lifting. The dog gave a single bark, then surged forward with renewed purpose. Tom struggled to keep up as Rex navigated a particularly steep section of trail, where recent erosion was evident. At the edge of his flashlight's beam, Tom saw where part of the path had collapsed. Rex began barking continuously now, moving to the edge and looking down the slope. Tom approached cautiously, directing his light into the darkness below. The beam found Jack Miller about 30 feet down, sheltered inadequately beneath a makeshift lean-to. He wasn't moving. "Miller!" Tom shouted. No response. Rex whined urgently, already searching for a way down. Tom grabbed the dog's collar. "Wait. We'll kill ourselves trying to reach him in the dark." Thinking quickly, Tom removed his emergency whistle, a habit from his hunting days, and blew 3 sharp blasts, the universal distress signal. He repeated it at intervals, hoping some other hiker or resident might hear. Between signals, he called Jack's name, his voice echoing across the canyon. On the 3rd series of whistle blasts, Tom saw movement below. Jack's arm raised weakly, waving to indicate consciousness. Relief flooded through Tom, followed immediately by renewed concern. They still faced the enormous challenge of extraction. Jack clearly couldn't climb up, and Tom couldn't safely descend in current conditions. "Hang on, Miller," he shouted. "Help is coming." Whether that was truth or hope remained to be seen. Tom fumbled in his pockets, producing an emergency foil blanket, another hunter's habit. He weighted it with stones and carefully lowered it down the slope using a length of paracord from his coat. It wasn't much, but it might help Jack retain some body heat until proper rescue arrived. The wait seemed eternal. Tom alternated between whistle blasts, shouted encouragement to Jack, and calls to his own wife via the satellite text device he carried when hunting. Rex never left the edge, his eyes fixed on his handler below, occasionally letting out a low whine that pierced Tom more effectively than any human cry could have done. When the distant sound of helicopter rotors finally reached them, Tom nearly wept with relief. The search and rescue team, alerted by Tom's wife, arrived with professional efficiency: ropes, medical equipment, evacuation protocols. As they prepared to descend to Jack, the team leader asked how Tom had found him in such remote terrain, in darkness, in a storm. Tom looked at Rex, who stood trembling with exhaustion but still vigilant. "I had help," he said simply, "the best kind." As the rescue technicians secured Jack to a stretcher for evacuation, Tom found himself standing beside Rex, both watching the careful procedure with identical expressions of concerned attention. Without conscious thought, Tom placed his hand on the dog's head. "You did good," he said grudgingly. "Real good." Rex leaned slightly into the touch, the first time he'd acknowledged Tom as anything other than a threat. By the time the helicopter lifted away with Jack secured inside, something fundamental had shifted between man and dog. A reluctant respect born in crisis, the first fragile thread of understanding. Jack drifted through layers of consciousness, fragments of reality interspersed with dreams. White walls, beeping machines, voices discussing compound fracture and pulmonary contusion. Then darkness again, and in the darkness memories. Afghanistan, Sarah, Rex. Always Rex. When lucidity finally settled around him like morning fog lifting, he found himself in a hospital room, right leg encased in a complicated brace, tubes and wires connecting him to an array of monitoring equipment. A nurse noticed his open eyes, approached with professional cheer. "Welcome back, Mr. Miller. You've been with us 3 days now." 3 days. Jack tried to speak, found his throat raw from the breathing tube they'd apparently removed recently. The nurse offered ice chips, explained the extent of his injuries: broken tibia and fibula, 3 fractured ribs, moderate hypothermia, and concerning cardiac irregularities they were still monitoring. "You're very lucky," she added. "Another few hours on that mountain in those conditions." She left the sentence unfinished, its conclusion obvious. Jack managed to form one word, his voice a harsh whisper. "Rex?" The staff had no answers about his dog, which struck Jack as both absurd and devastating. He'd been saved. By Rex, by Tom Wilson of all people, by the search and rescue team that had airlifted him from the mountain. But no one could tell him if the architect of his rescue had survived the ordeal. Jack discovered his satellite phone among his personal effects, now repaired and charged. He called Margaret, who answered on the first ring. "Jack, thank God. The hospital's been giving me updates, but they wouldn't let me visit yet." Before she could continue, he interrupted. "Rex, is he?" "He's alive," she assured quickly. Exhausted, dehydrated, Tom Wilson's been caring for him. The information was so unexpected that Jack wondered briefly if he was still dreaming. Tom Wilson, who had campaigned against Rex's presence in the neighborhood, who had partnered with Richard Blake to undermine the shelter, was now caring for the dog he'd once labeled dangerous. Margaret filled in the gaps. How Tom had followed Rex through the storm, how he'd stayed on the mountainside until rescue arrived, how he'd brought the exhausted German Shepherd to his own home when it became clear Rex needed immediate attention and wouldn't leave the mountain willingly. "He's been bringing him to the hospital daily," Margaret added. "The staff won't allow Rex inside, of course, but Tom sits with him in the parking lot for hours. Says Rex won't eat properly, just stares at the hospital entrance." The image constricted something in Jack's chest. "I need to see him," he said, already reaching for the call button. The nurse who responded was sympathetic but immovable. Hospital policy prohibited animals. Jack's vital signs, previously stable, began to fluctuate as his agitation grew. A doctor was summoned, concerned discussions held just beyond his hearing. Margaret proved herself invaluable once again. As a VA counselor with a background in therapeutic interventions, she presented a case that Rex's presence constituted a medical necessity for Jack's recovery, not a mere comfort measure. She cited studies, regulations, and finally, when bureaucracy proved resistant, made a personal appeal to the hospital administrator, who happened to have a brother who'd served in Iraq. 2 days later, under strict conditions, including a recent bath and temporary therapy animal designation, Rex was allowed a 15-minute visit. Tom Wilson wheeled Jack to the hospital's solarium, a glassed-in space filled with plants where Rex waited, unnaturally subdued but immaculately groomed. The moment he saw Jack, the dog's demeanor transformed. Ears up, eyes bright, the quivering tension of a soldier maintaining discipline while wanting to break rank. "Come here, boy," Jack said, his voice still rough. Rex moved forward with careful restraint, mindful of Jack's injuries, and rested his head lightly on Jack's lap. Jack's hand found the familiar fur, fingers trembling slightly. Something tight in his chest eased for the first time since waking. Tom watched the reunion with an expression Jack couldn't quite interpret, something between reluctant respect and deeper understanding. "He wouldn't leave that mountain without you," Tom said abruptly. "Had to carry him partway down after they airlifted you out. Fought me the whole time?" Jack met the older man's eyes, finding none of the previous antagonism. "Thank you," he said simply, "for following him, for taking care of him." Tom shifted uncomfortably. "Well, couldn't very well leave him out there, and my wife's always had a soft spot for dogs." He cleared his throat. "Anyway, he can stay with us until you're back on your feet. Got a good setup in the garage, heated, comfortable." The offer, gruff but genuine, was perhaps the most surprising development in a week full of unexpected turns. The media discovered the story on day 6 of Jack's hospitalization. A local reporter had overheard emergency responders discussing the 3-legged military dog who had navigated miles of wilderness in a storm to save his owner. The initial human interest piece in the Pinewood Gazette spawned larger coverage. Regional television, then national outlets looking for an uplifting veteran story. Jack refused all interview requests but couldn't prevent the narrative from spreading. Heroic dog, wounded warrior, mountain rescue. Hospital staff began treating him with a subtle deference that made him deeply uncomfortable. What the public saw as heroism, Jack recognized as desperation. Rex had nearly killed himself, saving a man who'd been foolish enough to ignore weather warnings. More concerning than the unwanted attention was the worrying development in Jack's medical status. The cardiac irregularities noted upon admission hadn't resolved as expected. His doctor, a cardiologist brought in for consultation, requested additional tests, his expression carefully neutral as he reviewed the results. "Mr. Miller, I'm concerned about what we're seeing in your cardiac function," he explained during morning rounds. "The combination of hypothermia, physical trauma, and your pre-existing condition has created some complications. I'd like to run a more comprehensive evaluation." The comprehensive evaluation revealed what Jack had secretly feared since the mountain. His heart wasn't merely stressed, it was failing. Years of untreated PTSD, the physical demands of combat, genetic predisposition, and now the trauma of his accident had created a perfect storm of cardiac damage. The cardiologist used terms like reduced ejection fraction and ventricular remodeling, but the bottom line was clear. Without intervention, expensive medication, possible surgical procedures, lifestyle modifications, Jack's prognosis was measured in months, not years. While Jack grappled with his mortality in the sterile confines of the hospital, Pinewood faced its own crisis point. Richard Blake, sensing opportunity in Jack's absence, had accelerated his timeline for the shelter property acquisition. An emergency town council meeting was called to vote on his revised proposal, which now included slightly more generous terms for the shelter's relocation and a cynical nod to our community's heroic veterans, in the form of a memorial bench along the proposed development's walking path. Margaret attended the meeting, intending to request a postponement until Jack could participate. She found the community center packed beyond capacity, Blake commanding the podium with slick visuals of economic projections. The shelter's supporters seemed outnumbered by business interests and property owners eager for increased valuations. Tom Wilson, conspicuously absent from Blake's side, slipped into the seat beside Margaret. "This doesn't feel right," he muttered, pushing this through while Miller's laid up. His conversion wasn't complete. Tom still believed development was necessary for Pinewood's future, but Blake's opportunism had soured his support. The vote proceeded despite Margaret's objections, resulting in provisional approval for Blake's proposal pending final review the following month. The shelter was given 90 days to secure alternative arrangements before construction would begin. Hope Haven's director, a tired woman who had fought this battle too many times in too many towns, looked resigned. "We'll figure something out," she told Margaret afterward. "We always do. But I'm worried about the animals we'll have to turn away in the meantime. The animals like Rex," she didn't need to add. "The unadoptable, ones who needed time and special circumstances to find their people." Jack received the news about the shelter vote with disturbing calm. In truth, his focus had narrowed to more immediate concerns. The pain in his chest that medication couldn't fully address, the growing weakness in his body, the difficult conversations with medical staff about quality of life and advance directives. When Margaret visited, bringing updates about community efforts to challenge Blake's proposal, Jack listened politely but without his previous engagement. "It might be for the best," he said at one point. "Progress happens, things change, people leave." The resignation in his voice alarmed her more than anger would have. The final blow fell during Jack's third week of hospitalization. Tom had brought Rex for his now regular visit, and at the dog, showing visible improvement in energy, though still abnormally subdued. The veterinarian Tom had consulted appeared midway through the visit, asking to speak with both men privately. Her expression prepared them for unwelcome news. She discovered masses during Rex's examination, advanced cancer that had metastasized throughout his abdomen. "This explains his previous symptoms," she explained gently. The shelter probably noticed declining health but attributed it to age and his injury. Most rescue organizations can't afford comprehensive diagnostics for every animal. The prognosis was painfully familiar to Jack. Months, not years. Aggressive treatment might buy time, but at the cost of quality of life. Rex, like his handler, was living on borrowed time. Jack absorbed this information with the strange detachment that had characterized his recent days, while Tom, surprisingly, struggled visibly with emotion. "Isn't there something?" he began, but the veterinarian shook her head kindly. "We can keep him comfortable. That's the best gift now." When they were alone again, Rex still resting his head on Jack's lap, Tom spoke with uncharacteristic uncertainty. "What will you do?" Jack looked down at Rex, who gazed back with the steady trust that had become the cornerstone of his reconstructed life. In that moment, clarity returned. Not about survival, but purpose. "Take him home," Jack said, his voice stronger than it had been in weeks. "Whatever time we have left, we'll spend it together, where we belong." The cabin seemed smaller after weeks in the hospital, its familiar corners now shadowed with new awareness of mortality. Jack navigated the space on crutches, his legs still encased in a brace, each movement measured against dwindling reserves of energy. Rex stayed close, his own gait slowed by illness, but his attention to Jack's needs unwavering. They established new routines, medication schedules for both, shorter walks along the stream, quiet evenings by the wood stove. Margaret visited daily at first, gradually reducing her checks, as Jack demonstrated his ability to manage. Tom Wilson, to everyone's ongoing surprise, appeared regularly with groceries or firewood, staying for brief, awkward conversations that slowly evolved into something approaching companionship. The community's reaction to Jack's return was unexpected. Neighbors who had previously kept their distance now stopped by with casseroles or offers of assistance. Veterans from surrounding towns made pilgrimages to meet the pair whose story had spread through their networks. Jack accepted this attention with reluctant grace, recognizing that refusing it would hurt Rex, who brightened visibly during these interactions despite his weakening condition. For his part, Jack found strange comfort in these final days, a simplicity of purpose, a presence in the moment that had eluded him since Afghanistan. They were dying men, he and Rex, but they were living fully in whatever time remained. The night of the break-in was unseasonably warm for late autumn, the kind of evening that hinted at summer's ghost. Jack had fallen asleep in his armchair, a dog-eared paperback open on his lap, Rex dozing at his feet. The sound that woke him was subtle, not the crack of breaking glass or splintering wood, but the soft scrape of the back door latch being manipulated. Rex was already alert, head raised, ears forward, a low growl building in his chest. Jack reached for his phone, then stopped, some instinct warning against movement. The living room remained dark, illuminated only by dying embers in the wood stove, but it offered clear sightlines to the kitchen, where a shadow now detached itself from deeper darkness. "Don't move," a voice commanded as the shadow resolved into a man, tall, broad-shouldered, face obscured by a ski mask. He held something in his right hand, the silhouette suggesting a weapon. Rex's growl deepened, his body tensing to rise despite his illness. The intruder's attention shifted. "Call off your dog, Miller, or I'll put him down right now." The casual cruelty in the threat ignited something in Jack that weeks of illness had banked but not extinguished. He shifted slightly, drawing the man's focus back to him and away from Rex. "What do you want?" Jack asked, his voice steady despite the adrenaline now coursing through his system. "Just delivering a message," the intruder replied, moving further into the room. "Mr. Blake sends his regards. Says it would be a shame if anything happened to delay the shelter project again. Like, say, another emotional appeal from a wounded veteran." A hired intimidator, then. Jack assessed his options with cold clarity. His crutches leaned against the far wall, unreachable. His leg brace severely limited mobility. The phone remained in his pocket, but he'd never dial before the man reached him. That left Rex, old, sick, but still a trained military dog with fighting instincts. As if reading his thoughts, Rex had begun a slow, strategic repositioning, belly low to the ground, using the coffee table for partial cover. "Blake's going to get his development," Jack said, deliberately keeping his tone conversational, buying seconds. "I'm not fighting that battle anymore." The intruder laughed, a sound without humor. "Yeah, well, he wants to make sure it stays that way. Nothing personal, just business." He moved closer, weapon now clearly visible, a hunting knife, blade catching dull orange reflections from the wood stove. Jack tensed, preparing for whatever might come next when Rex made his decision. With a surge of strength that belied his condition, the German Shepherd launched himself at the intruder, targeting the weapon arm with military precision. What followed was chaos, the man's shout of surprise, Rex's snarls, the sound of bodies colliding with furniture. Jack fought his way upright, grabbing a fireplace poker for support and defense. The intruder had underestimated Rex's training. Despite age and illness, the dog maintained his grip on the man's arm, forcing him to drop the knife. But physics and health worked against Rex. The man outweighed him significantly, and cancer had weakened muscles once capable of bringing down armed combatants. Jack saw the moment Rex's strength began to fail, saw the intruder's free hand form a fist, preparing to strike the dog's injured side. The cabin door burst open before the blow could land. Tom Wilson stood in the entrance, shotgun raised, expression thunderous. "Get away from them," he ordered, voice deadly quiet. The intruder froze, assessing this new threat. Rex maintained his hold, trembling now with exhaustion. "This isn't your business, old man," the intruder snarled. Tom's response was to chamber around, the sound unnaturally loud in the cabin. "I'm making it my business. On the floor, hands where I can see them, or I'll give you another breathing hole." Something in Tom's voice, the absolute certainty perhaps, convinced the man. He slowly lowered himself, Rex finally releasing his arm but remaining in guard position despite his heaving sides. Later, after Sheriff Davis had taken the intruder away with promises of serious charges, after a veterinarian friend of Tom's had examined Rex and administered pain medication for newly aggravated injuries, Jack and Tom sat on the porch steps in exhausted silence. "How did you know?" Jack finally asked. Tom stared into the darkness for a long moment before answering. "Been keeping an eye on your place. Noticed an unfamiliar truck parked down the service road earlier. Seemed worth checking." He paused. "Also, Blake fired me last week. We had disagreements about his methods." Jack absorbed this information with mild surprise. Tom had been Blake's strongest local supporter, his connection to the community. Why the change of heart? Tom's hands tightened on his knees, knuckles whitening. "Because I realized I've been blaming the wrong person for a very long time." He took a deep breath. "My son, Daniel, he served under your command in Afghanistan." The name hit Jack like physical impact. Daniel Wilson, 23, communications specialist, one of the 3 who hadn't made it out of the ambush, one of the faces that haunted Jack's dreams. "I know," Jack said quietly. Tom looked at him sharply. "You knew who I was, all this time?" Jack nodded. "Your son's photo, on your mantle. I saw it the first time you invited me in." What he didn't say. How recognition had flooded him with shame. How he'd nearly turned and left immediately. how only Rex's steadying presence had allowed him to stay. Tom's laugh held no humor. "And here I've been treating you like dirt, blaming you for his death, and you knew exactly who I was." He shook his head. "Daniel used to write about you, you know. Said you were the best officer he'd served under. That you cared about your men." Jack stared at his hands, unable to meet Tom's eyes. "I failed them. Failed him." Tom was quiet for a long moment. "Daniel told me once about the K9 units, how they'd walk point, how they'd saved his squadron once from IEDs. Said those dogs were the real heroes." He looked toward where Rex lay sleeping just inside the door. "Took me until now to understand what he meant. That dog was willing to die for you tonight, just like Daniel was willing to die for his brothers." Tom's voice broke slightly. "I've spent years being angry at the wrong things. At you for surviving when my boy didn't. At this town for moving on while I stayed stuck. Even at that damn dog for reminding me of what Daniel loved about the service." They sat in silence as moonlight spread across the yard. Finally, Tom spoke again, his voice steadier. "Blake hired that thug. I'm sure of it. Same type he brought in to convince reluctant property owners in other towns." He stood, decision evident in his posture. "I'm going to the council tomorrow. They need to know what kind of man they're doing business with." Jack looked up at him. "They won't believe you without proof." Tom's smile was grim. "Maybe not. But I've got 20 years of reputation in this town. And they'll believe us together, the grieving father and the wounded veteran. Especially when the sheriff files charges against Blake's hired muscle." Word of the break-in spread through Pinewood with the efficiency of small-town networks. By noon the following day, Jack's phone was ringing constantly. Concerned neighbors, outraged veterans, reporters seeking statements. Margaret arrived breathless, having heard garbled versions involving shootouts and hostage situations. The truth, while less dramatic, proved more compelling. Richard Blake, aspiring developer, had sent an armed man to threaten a decorated veteran and his service dog, both terminally ill, to prevent opposition to his project. The narrative wrote itself, perfect in its David's versus Goliath simplicity. The town council called an emergency session, the community center packed beyond capacity. Blake arrived confidently, dismissing the allegations as preposterous and suggesting Jack had staged the incident for sympathy. His composure cracked when his hired intimidator, facing serious charges, traded information for consideration, including text messages from Blake containing the cabin's address and instructions. Tom testified about Blake's methods in other towns, producing documentation he'd previously overlooked in his eagerness for economic development. Jack spoke briefly, not about the break-in, but about what the shelter represented. Second chances, recognition of value in the damaged and discarded. Most powerful, though, was the community's response. Veterans stood together, a silent wall of support behind Jack's chair. Shelter volunteers spoke about animals saved, families completed through adoption. Even business owners previously supportive of Blake's proposal expressed concerns about partnering with someone who employed such tactics. The council's vote was unanimous: termination of all agreements with Blake Development, renewed funding for the animal shelter, and exploration of alternative economic initiatives that aligned with community values. As the meeting adjourned, an impromptu celebration formed around Jack and Rex. Strangers approached to shake Jack's hand or gently pet Rex's head. Children delivered hand-drawn cards declaring them heroes. Through it all, Tom remained nearby, a quiet guardian somehow transformed from antagonist to ally. Daniel would be proud, he told Jack as they left the community center. Of both of us, maybe, for finally figuring out what matters. Looking at Rex, who had summoned the strength to attend despite his weakening condition, Jack found he agreed. Some battles were worth fighting, even when you knew the larger war was already lost. The weeks following the town council decision unfolded with gentle predictability. Jack's leg healed slowly, the brace eventually replaced by a walking boot that allowed greater mobility. His cardiac condition remained stable, not improving, but not worsening as rapidly as doctors had initially feared. Each morning began with medications, pills for Jack, special supplements hidden in soft food for Rex. They would sit together on the porch regardless of weather, watching sunrise paint the mountains with improbable colors. Some days brought visitors, Margaret with books and news from town, Tom with practical assistance and increasingly comfortable conversation, veterans from surrounding communities drawn by the story that wouldn't die despite Jack's reluctance to discuss it. Rex's decline progressed with heartbreaking steadiness. The once powerful muscles continued to atrophy, his appetite waning despite Jack's efforts with special meals. Yet his eyes remained clear, his awareness undiminished. He still insisted on daily walks, though these now extended only to the stream and back, each excursion requiring longer rest afterward. At night, he abandoned his bed to sleep pressed against Jack's side, both offering and drawing comfort through proximity. Jack found himself talking more during these quiet hours. About Sarah, about Afghanistan, about fears he'd never voiced to therapists. Rex listened with the perfect attention he'd always given, ears shifting slightly to track Jack's words, eyes occasionally meeting his with profound understanding. The community's support manifested in unexpected ways. A group of high school woodworking students delivered a custom-built ramp for the porch steps, more elegant than Jack's utilitarian construction. Local children established a rotation of artwork deliveries, crayon drawings of Rex with his missing leg proudly displayed, often wearing superhero capes or medals. The diner began sending meals twice weekly, with whoever happened to be heading toward Jack's cabin. Most surprising was the quiet fund established at Pinewood Community Bank. The Rex Fund, initially intended to cover veterinary expenses, but quickly growing beyond immediate needs. Tom Wilson became a daily presence, his initial awkwardness around Jack, evolving into something resembling friendship. They rarely spoke of Daniel directly, but his memory lived in the spaces between their conversations, in Tom's stories of childhood fishing trips, in Jack's occasional references to training exercises that had revealed character. One evening, as they sat watching Rex doze in a patch of late sun, Tom cleared his throat with uncharacteristic hesitation. "I've been thinking," he began. "My place has that mother-in-law apartment out back. After Sarah died, you know. Never used it much, but it's got everything. Bedroom, bathroom, small kitchen. Ground level, no stairs, close to town." He studied his coffee with intense concentration. "Might be easier than this cabin with winter coming, for both of you." Jack recognized the offer for what it was, not charity but atonement, an attempt to balance scales that could never truly be leveled. He considered refusing, his instinct for self-sufficiency still strong despite everything. But watching Rex struggle to find comfortable positions for his weakening body, Jack acknowledged that pride was a luxury his friend's comfort couldn't afford. "We'd need to install some specialized equipment," he said finally, "for Rex's mobility," and I snore. Tom's smile was quick, relieved. "So does my wife, match made in heaven." They moved the following week, a small procession of trucks carrying Jack's modest possessions to the Wilson property. The apartment was exactly as described, single-level, accessible, modernized with the needs of Sarah's mother in mind before her passing. Rex explored the space with methodical attention, ultimately settling in a patch of sunlight near the bay window that overlooked Tom's expansive yard. That evening, Tom's wife Ellen served dinner for all of them in the main house. Her first extended interaction with Jack, though she'd been sending food for weeks. She treated Rex with the matter-of-fact kindness of someone used to animals, setting a special bowl of soft food near his place beside Jack's chair. "He's welcome on the furniture," she said when Jack hesitated to let Rex join him on the couch after dinner. Daniel would have insisted. As Rex's condition deteriorated, the local veterinarian began making house calls, bringing medications to manage pain and nausea. Jack administered subcutaneous fluids when Rex stopped drinking adequately, a procedure that would have seemed impossible months earlier, but now felt like a natural extension of their partnership. They still walked daily, though walks had become symbolic gestures. A few steps into the yard, Rex leaning heavily against Jack's leg, both moving with the careful deliberation of those who understand the value of time. Visitors continued to arrive, many now asking permission to say goodbye to Rex, understanding his remaining days were precious and dwindling. Margaret arranged the most meaningful visit, a group of veterans with PTSD, participants in her therapy program, each paired with a service dog. They gathered in Tom's backyard, the humans talking quietly while the dogs formed a protective circle around Rex. Jack watched from the porch, struck by the communication happening between the animals. A language of subtle ear movements and body positioning that acknowledged Rex's status and condition. One handler explained it to Jack later. They know he's one of them. They're honoring him. That night, Rex seemed energized, more present than he had been in days, as if the recognition of his peers had strengthened something essential in him. Jack prepared himself for the inevitable. The veterinarian had provided medication to end Rex's suffering when the time came, with clear instructions for recognizing when quality of life had diminished beyond acceptable limits. He found himself cataloging each last experience. The last time Rex managed to walk to the stream, the last time he barked at a passing deer, the last time he accepted a treat from a child's outstretched hand. Yet Rex defied expectations, rallying when he seemed most depleted, finding reserves of strength that medical science couldn't explain, but that Jack recognized from battlefields, the human capacity to continue beyond physical limits when purpose remained. The fire began in the early hours of a December morning. Later investigation would identify an electrical fault in the apartment's aging heating system, flames spreading rapidly through walls before any alarm could sound. Jack woke to Rex's urgent barking, not his usual alert but something sharper, more insistent. The bedroom was already filling with smoke, tendrils creeping beneath the closed door. Jack reached for his phone, found the bedside table empty. He'd left it charging in the living room, between them and the exit. Rex barked again, pulling at Jack's sleeve with uncharacteristic forcefulness. "Okay, boy, I'm up," Jack said, coughing as smoke filled his lungs. He pulled a shirt over his face, dropped low to the floor where air remained clearer. "Let's go." He opened the bedroom door to a wall of heat, flames already consuming the small living area, blocking the path to the main exit. Through watering eyes, Jack assessed their options: a window in the bedroom, possibly large enough for escape. He turned toward it just as a thunderous crack announced structural failure. A burning support beam crashed through the ceiling, landing between them and the window, sending sparks and debris across the bedroom. Rex barked furiously, not at the flames but at Jack, herding him toward the only remaining option, a narrow hallway leading to the apartment's rear door, rarely used and partially blocked by stored items. Jack crawled forward, disoriented by smoke and heat, Rex pressing against him, guiding his movement. They reached the hallway as another section of ceiling collapsed behind them, temporarily blocking the fire's direct path, but filling the space with choking smoke and ash. Jack's chest constricted, his weakened heart laboring against smoke inhalation and exertion. He felt himself slowing, vision narrowing to a dim tunnel. Somewhere distant, he heard sirens, shouts. Tom and Ellen must have woken, called for help. The rear door appeared through the smoke, Rex circling to position himself behind Jack, pushing him forward with the last reserves of his strength. Jack's hands found the doorknob, burning hot against his palm. Locked. His fingers fumbled with the deadbolt, clumsy with urgency and lack of oxygen. The mechanism finally gave way, door swinging outward into blessedly cold night air. Jack stumbled through, dropping to his knees in the snow, turning to ensure Rex followed. But the doorway remained empty, smoke billowing out like black breath. "Rex!" Jack called, voice raw. "Come!" From within the burning structure came a single bark, acknowledgement, not compliance. Jack struggled to his feet, intending to re-enter the inferno, but collapsed as his oxygen-starved body betrayed him. Tom appeared, running from the main house, pulling Jack further from danger. "Rex is still inside," Jack gasped, fighting against Tom's restraining arms. Tom's expression hardened with grim understanding. Before either could act, a final shuddering crash echoed from within the apartment as the remaining ceiling gave way. Flames shot skyward through the collapsing roof, illuminating the yard with terrible brightness. The fire department arrived moments later, professionals efficiently containing the blaze before it could spread to the main house. Paramedics attended to Jack, administering oxygen, checking vital signs compromised by smoke and stress. Through it all, he remained fixated on the burning structure, refusing evacuation to the hospital until searchers had examined the ruins. Tom stayed beside him, steady hand on his shoulder, saying nothing because nothing could be said. When firefighters finally emerged, faces telling the story before words could, Jack accepted the news with the still composure of someone who had always known how the story would end. They found Rex near the rear door, overcome by smoke while ensuring Jack's escape. The veterinarian, summoned by Tom in the chaotic aftermath, confirmed what they already knew. Rex had died, ensuring his handler's survival. A final mission completed with the unwavering dedication that had defined him. In his final moments, he had been not a sick, aging dog, but a soldier with purpose, protecting his own until the end. Jack cradled Rex's body as dawn broke over the mountains, whispering words only the two of them would ever share. The memorial service occurred 1 week later at the shelter, now temporarily housed in the community center while permanent facilities were constructed. Jack had insisted on simplicity, but the community had other ideas. Veterans from 3 states arrived in formal uniform, forming an honor guard as Rex's flag-draped casket, donated by a local woodworker, was carried to its resting place beneath an old oak tree on the shelter property. Children placed drawings and letters around the small grave. The mayor, previously hesitant in his support for the shelter, delivered a surprisingly emotional address about service and loyalty. Jack sat silently throughout, Tom and Margaret flanking him like sentinels, Ellen's hand occasionally squeezing his when emotion threatened to overwhelm. Most remarkable was the announcement made during the service. The Rex Fund had grown exponentially. Community donations supplemented by veteran organizations and private contributors who had followed their story. The fund would support construction of a new, expanded shelter facility with a dedicated wing for rehabilitation of working dogs and specialized adoption services for veterans. The first building would bear Rex's name. The training center would be dedicated to Daniel Wilson's memory. Jack found himself called upon to speak, standing with effort, still weakened by smoke inhalation and emotional exhaustion. Rex would have hated all this fuss, he began, drawing gentle laughter. But he would have understood what you're really honoring, the bond between those who serve, human or canine, the promise that no one gets left behind. The medical miracle came without explanation. Follow-up examinations after the fire revealed unexpected improvements in Jack's cardiac function. Not complete recovery, but significant enough to revise his prognosis from months to potentially years. His doctors attributed the change to recent medication adjustments. Jack privately suspected something deeper, as if Rex had given him not just physical rescue, but some portion of his own life force. He kept this theory to himself, knowing how it would sound to others, but feeling its truth in quiet moments when grief lifted enough to allow gratitude. Spring arrived with gentle insistence, ice retreating from the stream that ran behind Tom and Ellen's property. Jack had remained in their guest room after the fire, initially from necessity, but increasingly from choice, as the improbable friendship with his son's commander deepened into family bonds. The shelter's new building rose steadily at the edge of town, a testament to community will and the power of a story that refused to fade. Jack joined the construction crew when his strength allowed, finding purpose in physical labor and the visible progress of something permanent being created. The visit to Hope Haven's temporary facility was Ellen's idea, a gentle suggestion 1 year to the day after Rex's memorial service. "They have a new arrival, I think you should meet," she said over breakfast, her tone carefully casual. Jack had avoided the shelter since Rex's death, finding even the thought of it painful. But Ellen's expression, hopeful but not demanding, convinced him to reconsider. Tom drove them without comment, his quiet support another thread in the tapestry of healing they'd woven together. The shelter director met them at the entrance, leading them to a kennel set apart from the main adoption area. Inside, a German Shepherd puppy approximately 4 months old watched them with intelligent eyes. "Military working dog washout," the director explained. "Too independent-minded for the program," and she opened the gate, revealing what the puppy's seated position had concealed, a missing rear leg, the result of a birth defect. "We thought of you immediately," she said unnecessarily. The puppy approached without hesitation, head tilted in evaluation, posture confident despite his disability. Jack knelt slowly, allowing the puppy to investigate him with dignified curiosity. Their eyes met in a moment of recognition that transcended rational explanation. The same connection he'd felt with Rex that first day, impossibly recreated with this new soul. "His name is Hope," the director said. "But that could change, of course." Jack shook his head, feeling the first genuine smile in months spread across his face. "No," he said softly. "Hope is exactly right." As the puppy leaned trustingly against his leg, Jack felt the circle completing. Not an ending, but a continuation. The legacy of one extraordinary dog living on through the chance given to another. In that moment, he understood what Rex had truly saved him for. Not just to survive, but to begin again. Life doesn't always give us second chances, but when it does, they often come from unexpected places. Jack and Rex's journey reminds us that healing isn't found in forgetting our wounds, but in sharing them with someone who understands without words. For those of us who've weathered life's storms, loss, grief, illness, regret, the greatest gift may be finding someone who sees our scars not as damage, but as proof of survival. We all carry invisible injuries. Some from battlefields far away, others from the quiet battles fought in hospital rooms or empty houses. But like Rex, with his 3 legs and unwavering spirit, our value isn't diminished by what we've lost. Sometimes the most profound connections happen when 2 broken souls recognize each other. When someone looks at us and thinks, "No one wants a broken dog." Not unless they've been broken too. Remember that it's never too late to heal, to forgive, to begin again. And sometimes, our greatest purpose is found in giving another soul the second chance we ourselves once needed. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought of the story. See you in the next video.